Few things derail art practice as quickly as fear. The fear of failure, the fear of not living up to the standards we think we should. And alongside this villain comes expectations. The entity that makes us fear failing in the first place, and the thing we feel like we have to live up to. Art is hard. It always has been. But does it always have to be? We, being the artists of the world, bring beauty, life, and intrigue to each day. But we also seem just as adept at making our own lives more difficult. Perhaps these two work in tandem. In this series, we are going to be exploring what makes art so hard and how we can maneuver around the obstacles, set ourselves on a better path toward continued creative practice. My name is Zach. I'm an artist and an art teacher, and if you are enjoying these podcasts, please like and subscribe. Let's dive in. Today, we are tackling fear and expectations, two massive contributors to what can make art so difficult. They are being included together here because they are often interconnected forces, and they intertwine to create a formidable barrier to artistic progress. I think looking at them together and untangling them might be a good way to look at how we can manage them, and move ourselves out of the tangled mass. Fear often stems from the worry of falling short of expectations, and expectations come from many different places. We often have these imposed on us by our society and the culture that we live in. Here in the United States, we have this weird duality where it is encouraged for kids to work on artwork, and as they get older, it's almost seen as this shameful thing. You don't want to tell people that you're a struggling artist. You don't want to tell people that you want to make art as a profession. There's some societal impact to push people away from that, because the overriding assumption is that artists are poor and the American way is to make money and that is what makes you happy. And so there are some societal pressures and expectations that can push people away from that. Often our parents are very encouraging when we're young over all of the artwork that they do. They save it all. They're so excited. They show it to people. They put it on the fridge. But as you get older, you start to lose the quantity of parents who are excited to brag about their kids' artwork. And it starts to fade usually about the end of high school. And parents then can often push their kids towards things that are more safe, more secure. They can push them towards things that they did. I think there are a lot of places around the world where the parents often want the kids to do things in a particular vein, take on a family business, do something similar to what the family has done, do something that keeps you in that town, do something that keeps you from moving away and being a smaller part of their life. But expectations can also come from just comparing yourself to others. It's so common for us as artists to look at other people and to run ourselves up against them and to look at what they can do. Just this morning, I was watching a video on some art techniques and art tips and knowledge that I wish I knew when I was younger, one of those kinds of videos. And I found myself looking at the content that was being produced, and immediately I am evaluating, is he better than me or worse than me? And I was like, well, he's better than me, and it's going to take some time to catch up to him. And there's immediately a tendency to go there for many of us, and like in this situation, myself included. I just turned off the video and laughed out loud for a moment and kind of mocked myself a little bit. I was like, you literally are writing content for the next podcast on how comparing yourself to others is just a waste of time and it's a productivity killer. We're all succumb to this though. We create expectations for ourselves based on comparing our work to other people's work. And then another area of this, and maybe the last area that we'll hit right here before diving further in, is that we have a lot of self-imposed expectations. And these can come from any of the other pieces, from the culture, society, parents, comparing to others. But we often just hold ourselves to this extremely high level of expectation. We want to succeed quickly. We want to learn how to draw and paint from scratch in a year. And the reality is that's probably not going to happen. And our expectations can very easily get out of control, especially if they're not well understood. If we haven't spent a lot of time thinking about them and processing them, they have a tendency to get out of control. So we know fear is bad, and I think most of us know that we should keep our expectations rational, but it's difficult. We have this tendency towards perfectionism that just seems to get in the way. We intellectually can wrap our heads around the fact that it's going to take a long time to learn how to draw like so-and-so, or it's going to take a long time to learn how to paint the way that I want to. But we're impatient, and we're impatient because we live in it. We're constantly exposed to our own failures, to our own inadequacies when it comes to drawing and painting things. And sometimes you can iterate so quickly with drawing and painting, you can sit down and cover pages upon pages of a sketchbook in a single afternoon. And if that's 45 little failures, quote unquote, staring back at you, it can be a little daunting. But one of the best things you can do about the fear of not meeting expectations is to really understand your thoughts and feelings, to truly understand where these emotions are coming from. Like so many human things, if we don't really analyze what we feel, it can be difficult to understand how to move forward. So what is it that you fear about starting a new medium or trying that big project? Is it failure? Is it just the possibility of the piece not turning out well? But what is the fear of failure in that situation? Like, what does failure actually mean with a project? Walk yourself through what this would actually look like. So you tried oil painting, brand new to it. It's not something you have ever dived into before. And it went poorly. Maybe it went terribly. What now? Do you take all those supplies and you throw them away? Do you bang your head against a wall? But walk yourself through that failure, what that would actually feel like and what that would actually look like. We can amplify things inside of our own heads to an unhealthy level and, frankly, an irrational level. If that fear really comes from things not turning out well, then maybe take a harsh look at your expectations. Is it rational for you to expect things to turn out when you are just getting your feet wet? Would you expect the same of other people in your life? This is a really good strategy sometimes to look at yourself and try to pull yourself out of your own skin and look through another person's eyes. We often have people in our lives who are struggling with or working in similar areas to what we are, and we're so gracious and kind with them. So try to think of yourself through their eyes. Would your spouse or partner or friends or parents condemn you for having your first oil painting turn out poorly? No, of course not. In the same way that your parents probably didn't yell at you when you fell off your bike the first time. The expectation should be that when you're learning something, it takes some time. It takes some energy. It takes some falls and some bruises and some bleeding in order to improve and to get to the point where you want to be. But if you take a really good solid look at your expectations, in that situation, you might find that your expectations are just far too high. My expectations were to come out of my first oil painting having a good painting, and it wasn't good, and so now I'm upset. Not only do you need to sit down and look at what does good mean when we're talking about a painting, but also that expectation was not rational. And so, structuring more rational expectations for yourself can often be a way to avoid that heartache. I struggle with this personally, and actually for me a lot of it is oil painting. And this is kind of funny from an outside perspective because most of the time my oil paintings turn out pretty decently. I'm of course far more aware of all of the inconsistencies and the pieces that didn't turn out well than anyone else is, but that's always the case as an artist. But I have a tendency to finish an oil painting, it turns out well, and then I'm scared to re-engage with it because I'm afraid that the next piece won't. Almost like a celestial roll of the die that like, well, I got a good roll this time, and so likely the next roll of these die won't be beneficial to me and it'll be a bad painting. And so I walk away from that. That's unfortunate because A, it stops me from actually oil painting. B, it's not rational. If I look at my bad, quote unquote, oil paintings, then they exist. Every fifth or seventh piece turns out in a way where it's like, I'm not going to post that. I'm not going to do anything with the footage. I don't like that painting. Even those paintings are generally not terrible. They're just not great. And, they're a little embarrassing because I know I can do better. And often, though, the next painting after that works out much better. So I have two paintings that happened like this recently. And maybe I'll flash them on the screen. That would probably be honest and authentic to do. But I had one that was an ice cream cone. And I tried to do like the swirling of the ice cream on top. And it didn't turn out well. It wasn't a long painting, maybe 1 to 2 hours. But I was just unhappy with how everything turned out in it. And so I set it aside. But the next painting that I did was a cupcake with frosting on top. And having spent the time working with that ice cream, I had a better understanding of how to handle the folds of the icing and how to make sure that the highlights and the shadows were correct to show that you had these weird geometric shapes that were also cylindrically wrapping around the top of the object. And so in that case, that helped tremendously. And another one is I sat down to paint a turkey, and I just was unhappy with it. But turkey faces are very complicated with all the caruncles and all the weird wrinkly junk. And I also picked a photo that I don't think was optimal. The photo was straight from the side, and so there was very little to allow for differentiation of form and light. And it was just not... This happens a lot, and this might be a whole video or podcast of its own, but choosing photos to work from when you're painting and drawing is really important, because just because a photograph looks good does not, in any way, shape, or form, mean that it's going to make a good painting. But the photo was bad for painting, and I also didn't do a very good job with it. But the next painting I did, I don't remember if it was the kingfisher or one of the other birds that I worked on, maybe the cardinal, but the next painting turned out really well. And so I know this intellectually. I know in my brain that my expectations shouldn't be that every painting turns out well. The expectation should mostly be like that I sit down and I finish a painting, that I walk a painting all the way through, that I concentrate on my brush technique, that I try not to waste too many brush movements, that I don't waste my paints, that I learn how to mix my colors better. Like, those are better, rational expectations. And the reality is, if you follow through on all those expectations, then you get to the end and you still have a painting that's finished. And for me, it means that I have a 5 in 6 or a 7 in 8 chance of that painting turning out well. And so that gamble is just not that big a gamble. But that is something that I struggle with actively with my oil painting. It's part of the reason why recently I've been doing a lot more gouache painting, because gouache is far more forgiving. And if I make a mistake, I don't have to wait 4 days for it to dry in order to dive back in. But I will not avoid oil painting forever. I will get back into it because I know I need to, and because it's the right thing to do when I'm trying to help other people and instruct them as well. So, but that's where I'm at with oil painting frequently, and I just feel like it's beneficial to share that. The fear of failure can actually be kind of a weird thing for artists too. Many of us, probably unconsciously, are afraid of trying and committing because at that point we may be faced with a terrible realization that we really aren't good enough. We really can't make it. And what do you do with this? What do you do with this information? So many of us have these large-scale aspirations, these things that we want to attain, and we don't take the steps to move towards those things. And I think part of the psychological reasoning there is, if you never try to do the thing, you never fail. And so that fear of failure not only makes your life more miserable in the moment, but it actually stops you from even engaging in the thing that you really want to engage in. And I know this is common because not only do I experience this, not only did I go to art school with lots of people who experience this, but I taught for 11 years. And this was a common thing. And a lot of students that had artistic ambitions ended up not following through on those because it felt risky, because it was scary. And a lot of that is, pieces of that are like, oh, that's risky, I'm going to do something that's more secure. But there's always this element, or there seemed to always be this element of, that's scary. And it's scary to dive into something artistic and creative and risk finding out that I couldn't do it. And so if it lives in the back of your head as this thing that you're always thinking about and like, oh yeah, I'd like to do that, maybe, when every star aligns and everything's great, and then you never actually have to have failed. And that's one of the most detrimental parts about the fear of failure, is that sometimes a fear of failure can just keep you from engaging in the things that you want to engage in at all. So is this you? Like, when you really look deeply inside yourself, do you harbor a fear of knowing that you aren't good enough, that you aren't capable of making the things you want to, of improving? And if this is the case, I would encourage you to look back at your past work. Take a look at some of your old sketchbooks. If you've just gotten into drawing and you feel hopeless already, my empathy and my sympathy for you, because it's a long journey. It takes a long time. What you're seeing playing out in the background is not miraculous or marvelous by any means, but even the skills to do this took a long time to get. There's mild quantities of 2 and even 3-point perspective, and there were lots of sketches that preceded this and lots of ideas that have floated around in my head for a long time. Now, there are also artists who could sit down and do something like this and, a heartbeat, and it would be no struggle for them at all. But there are a lot of us that it takes a long time to figure those things out. So if this is you, I would encourage you, look back at your old work, look at the things that you did before, and you will undoubtedly find that you are improving, you are getting better. And so you don't know. You don't really know if you're going to be able to be good enough until you put the time in. And you have to decide if this is what you want. How much do you desire this? Do you really want to keep moving forward? Do you want to be an artist? Do you want to bring things to life? Many of us hold tight to these feelings and we keep them deep inside of us, and I think a lot of us aren't even aware that we have them. I'm cursed with this high natural level of introspection, and so I'm aware of these things in myself, and that doesn't make me any better than anyone else. It's just one of my weird personality quirks. But a lot of people are unaware that these are some of the fears that they're psychologically tossing around inside their mind. But here's the weird reality of this. You might be right. You might not be good enough. But you know what? That's only for you to know and for you to decide. And the only way you can do that is if you really, truly try. And I think if you have the bug, like you have to create, and you can, and you'll find a way, and you'll put time and energy into these things, but like you have to move past the fear of knowing the truth of where you stand. And honestly, even knowing the truth of where you stand is only knowing the truth of that particular moment. It's knowing where your skills are now. Are they enough for whatever it is you want to do? But if you can look back and you can see that you have improved, then that means you have no concept of how far you can improve. But trying to acknowledge that feels like being on the edge of the cliff and like trusting your friends that there's an invisible bridge and they're yelling, "Step out, it'll be fine," like in the Indiana Jones movie. And you just have to kind of trust the process and trust the people around you that moving forward will be okay, that it'll be safe enough. And this has been me for a huge chunk of my life, like too fearful to dive in. Because then I would actually have an answer and I would know for certain if I was or was not even capable of doing the things I want to do. I've come to several conclusions about this. One is like, I don't care. Like my skills are high enough that I will be able to do something. And I don't know where they end. Just like I mentioned before, like if you haven't put in the time, you don't know where it's going to end. And I've never hit a plateau where I've stopped improving at art. And so that leads me to conclude that even if that exists, if that plateau exists, I haven't reached it yet. And so there's still a chance for me to improve from where I am. And maybe at some point in the future, I will hit a point where it's like, I haven't improved in a year, so I guess this is as good as I'm getting. But the thing is that like, I'm able to work really well from reference, and I'm learning how to build things out of my imagination just on a daily basis. And I'm continuing to grow and I'm continuing to improve. And even if I was stuck right here with my skills and they never get any better than they are, I can still make cool things. And I can still make pretty paintings. And I still make things that make people happy. And that's okay. If that's where it all ends, that's enough. And that's safe. I can look at that and I'll be like, okay, well, even if I never get any better, like I'm still capable of things that are decent. And I'm still capable of these things that are nice. But I have for a long time been very afraid of diving in and engaging in the things that I really want to make, because if I do, psychologically, I'll have to come face to face with the reality of whether I can or can't. And that's scary. That's terrifying. And that's very, very, very human. And I think I figured this out primarily and in a very specific sense, teaching through the pandemic. And figuring out that I have spent all this time focusing on teaching and I've spent very, very little time on my own artwork. And that's not a problem. If you dedicate yourself to teaching other humans, like that's a great, noble pursuit. But I think for me, when I realized that that was the case, I realized that I had put all of my own artistic endeavors on the back burner and my job in some capacities necessitated that. I felt this like welling up inside of me of, well, I can't unknow this now. And so now that I know this, I'm never going to be content unless I try. And so that's when I started looking into, okay, how do I really improve? That's when I started taking some classes. It's when I built my regiment for my practice. It's when I started working on things. And it's when I wish I would have started this channel, because it would have been nice to have worked through some of those processes. But that's, they say that the best time to plant a tree is, 10 years ago, and the second best time is now. So here we are. But this has been a huge struggle for me for a lot of my life. So if this is you, I hope that just hearing that is, I'm not telling it for my own benefit, but I'm hoping that if you are hearing this and that is you in some capacity, that you understand you're not alone. There are other people, many, many, many other people who struggle with the same things. And it's important for us to understand that about ourselves and move forward and still keep making things. And where am I now with all of this? Like, I'm committed to progress, I'm committed to growth, to continually getting better, to sharing things, to building the worlds that live inside my head. And so I've started putting pieces like this together, which are things from my stories. I've started writing more frequently. And I'm putting it here and I'm putting it out into the public spheres, partially because it holds me accountable and also because I want all of the other people who are like me to see, like, you don't have to have all your crap figured out before you start working on the things you love. And it's okay to just start working. You know, you can start making your manga. You can start making your graphic novel before you know how to draw figures. There are famous illustrators who drew for Marvel and DC that I can't remember the guy's name off the top of my head, but one very famous artist who couldn't draw feet. And so he just didn't. But like everything else he drew was fine, you know, and just do what it is you want to do. Start doing it and just don't have expectations that it's going to be perfect at first. Don't give in to fear. I think bringing this back around to some manner of conclusion is understand where your fear is coming from. That's the first thing you have to work from, is understanding where your fear comes from. Because only then can you start to dismantle it and understand it. And realize that it's an emotion and that your emotions are relevant, they're important, they're valid. And understanding where they come from, when you look at something like fear, which we generally consider a negative emotion, understanding what it's coming from allows you to hone in on it and adjust some of your strategies and to try to work on, like, what can I do to make this situation better? Fear and expectations are limiting. They confine you to a specific and predefined idea of what you are and what your art is. Once you get past the negativity they bring to your process, this revelation rears its ugly head, that they cage you, that your fear and your expectations wedge you into a particular moment in time and they keep you there in stasis. Detaching yourself from irrational expectations and fear disconnects you from that burden, and it lifts the top off the cage. It gives you the ability to start moving forward and really critically analyzing what you're doing, what you want to be doing, and if you're heading in the right direction. So try to understand your fears, and then try to understand your expectations. Think about your expectations. Are they good? Are they rational? Are they pointing you in the direction that you want to go? They're yours after all. You have the ability to modify them, especially once you understand them in some capacity, and you can start pushing them to be something that is going to help get you where you want to go. They are hampering your art if you don't understand them, but they're a part of you as well. And they're a self-preservation mechanic in the human mind, so seek to understand them. Your expectations being set and your fears being set at different levels are things that we psychologically do to keep ourselves safe. We don't like to fail. We don't like to dive into things that are unpredictable. We want to know that what we're doing is safe, it's going to work out. But the reality is, especially with creative things, you don't know and you can't know. And yes, you could just go get a job doing anything that is predictable and solid and society needs, and that's fine. But if you are watching this and listening to this, if you're a creative person and you have the desire to bring things to life and to do things, will that satisfy you? Will that be good enough? So know yourself. Know what you need. Know what you need in the future, what you need right now, what you desire. And if you truly know yourself, moving through things will always be more pleasant, if not easier. Fear is natural and expectations exist whether we create them intentionally or not. And this process of trying to dissect where they come from will only benefit you and give you a greater understanding of who you are as a creative individual. Understanding them can help you move forward and eliminate the pieces of them that are not beneficial to your process. Don't let your fear and expectations keep you from making things. You need to make things. And the world needs you to make things too. Thank you all for listening. I really do appreciate it, and I hope this was helpful or interesting for you. Please let me know in the comments down below what fears are eating at your art right now, and better yet, how you might move forward through that fear. Keep creating, Have a good one, y'all. See you soon.